Question is that Amendment 2 be made. John Redwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd remind the House that I do offer advice to an industrial company and an investment company, but not on these subjects. The Honourable Lady for Birmingham Ladywood, I thought started in a very promising way. I admire the background she comes from. I can think of a former great Member of Parliament who came from a very similar background, who had deduced, I thought, some very sound principles on how economies and shops worked. And I thought the Honourable Lady was going to develop in that style. And I was really delighted when she said that she was now a convert to tax reduction. She said that she and the Labour Party now thought that taking corporation tax down from 28 to 21 was the right thing to do. So that is wonderful news, that we seem to have a cross-party accord that lower tax rates can bring businesses to Britain, they can keep more profit in Britain, they can even lead to more revenues if you let the policies fructify for long enough, and it helps to promote the economic growth we all want. And she went even further, because she then thought up another tax reduction she would like to see. And I'm not normally one to let a tax reduction opportunity go by. And there she was saying that she thought a tax reduction in business rates would be a very good idea, and it would be good if we could find a way to have a further reduction in business rates, because that would be very welcome after years of increases in the past. But then I got disappointed, because then the Honourable Lady said, oh, you can't have too much for a good thing, it might start to work. You've got to have a tax rise as well as having a tax reduction, and she did set one part of the business community against another, although she claimed she didn't. And I find this rather curious, because when you look at what we are meant to be debating now, we are meant to be debating the new Clause 2 in the name of members of the opposition, and that, of course, doesn't propose a reduction in business rates. And it doesn't propose an increase in the corporation tax rate. Although that, she said, is their policy, it allows us to talk about it, because it is actually very wide-ranging. In part of it, it says we can talk about any kind of tax we like, because it invites us to look at alternatives to corporation tax in the way that she was talking about. So we have a contradiction. We have an opposition which says that it has a settled policy, that it wishes to put the corporation tax rate up for the larger companies and to cut and then freeze the business rate, and yet we are asked to vote today on a much weaker amendment which just says that the Chancellor of the Exchequer should conduct a review of the impact of the policy of cutting the corporation tax rate from 21 to 20, and that review should also look at other options, which I presume would include the option which the Honourable Lady says she's already adopted. So I wonder whether Labour are in a bit of a muddle here, because why do they need this review if they have already made up their mind what the answer to the review is? And if they haven't made up their mind what the answer to the review is, why have we been, for once, given a clear policy when normally they use the advantages of opposition to be rather shy about coming up with clear policy? So let me address the policy they're recommending that the House adopts rather than the policy they might put to the electors. And that is that we need this review, and that we need the review to be carried out in the 6 months after the passage of this piece of legislation we're discussing today. So in other words, the review would be conducted before we knew the results of the tax reduction to which the review refers. Now, that also is a bit curious. You'd have thought that if you were conducting a review into the consequences of an action, you might want to see the action first. But no, Labour thinks that we can conduct a thought experiment on the action. I'm not against thought experiments. An awful lot of policy has to be based on thought experiments and on past history. And so we have this contradiction, that we got to do this in advance of the action, but we've also got the contradiction that apparently Labour has settled its policy without wanting the review. So I wonder whether the review is just a waste of time and a bit of a waste of money, whether it's some kind of smokescreen, whether there's some muddle between members of the front bench over whether they have a settled policy or not. So having started very warm and sympathetic towards the Honourable Lady, I now find myself reluctant to vote for this particular proposal, because I'm not sure it's a very serious proposal, because it seems to have already been prejudged by the offer that Labour has been making through the course of this debate. But when we think about other options, as we're invited to do under their new Clause 2 here, what we should bear in mind is that if you are clever with your taxation policies, you can actually cut a rate and increase the revenue. Now, that's the kind of tax cut I like at the moment, because I want to get the deficit down, and I think it makes intelligent sense not to pursue a policy of jealousy, but to decide how you get money out of rich companies, rich individuals, those who have the money, because one of the obvious things about taxation is you have to tax the people who've got the money. You can't tax people who don't have money. And so you have to set rates that they're prepared to pay, that they're prepared to stay and pay, that they're prepared to come here to pay because they're more attractive than rates elsewhere. Now, we have, under this clause, some evidence for this review already, in that the government has now got round to cutting the top rate of income tax from 50% to 45%. And the latest revenue figures, with the year just about complete, say that there is going to be an extraordinary surge of £9 billion of extra revenue this year compared with last year from payers of the top rate of income tax. Now, that is an astonishing achievement. I'm happy to give way.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. Would he accept that the primary cause of that increase in revenue is income shifting from one year to the other, and that many individuals were holding back on income in the year when it was 50% and have now brought it forward, now it's been reduced to 45%?
Because the revenue in the previous year was very similar to the revenue the year before that, before people knew that there might be a cut in the tax rate, and I suspect the year following this will also see good levels of revenue. I don't expect to see a sudden £9 billion reduction in the revenue in the year we're just about to start. So I think the honourable gentleman is peddling misery as always for no good reason, and that they should rejoice and accept the fact that sometimes if you cut the rate you get more money, and they always want to spend other people's money. Surely they should listen to how you can maximise the amount you get out of people.
The gentleman could therefore explain where he thinks this money has been that has now suddenly come just because the rates. If it's not rephasing of income, is he suggesting that people have somehow been avoiding tax, or have people suddenly come into this country to pay? There must be some reason for this increase if he doesn't accept my honourable friend's reason.
People seriously richer and better off than any of us and people in this House on MP salaries. And if the Honourable Lady meets such people occasionally, she will discover they have many more freedoms than the rest of people on when they earn income, where they take income, what they invest in, where they organise their affairs. Some of them weren't here, and they'll come here when the rate is lower. Some have some money in one country and some in another, and they can quite legally shift the money around and decide where they're going to earn more income. That is what companies do, as the Honourable Lady has sometimes discovered and complained about. So there are lots of flexibilities that rich people have, which means that a country which sets sensible tax rates attracts more of those people, keeps more of them, and gets them to do more things. There's also the disincentive effect. You can have someone who's legally settled here, keeps all their money here, but they don't work extra. Why should they? Because they're going to be taxed at too high a rate. Or they don't take an extra risk with their investment, because why should they? If it works, they get taxed, and if it doesn't work, they get 100% of the loss. So you change the climate. You encourage more confidence and more action if you set a competitive rate. I'll give way again if the honourable gentleman wants another go.
Well, I want to explore the Arthur-Laffer effect, because the honourable gentleman seems to be saying that if you reduce income tax rates, you increase the amount of money you take. How far would he take that argument? Would it be 40 pence in the pound, 35%? Would we abolish income tax rates at all and raise even more money?
Well, the honourable gentleman is now being completely stupid, isn't he? I mean, of course there are two rates of tax that will raise you no money, 0 and 100. And there is a curve between the two, as the honourable gentleman rightly remarks, first drawn, I think, on a napkin by Mr. Laffer. And most people, including the Treasury now, accept there is a Laffer curve. And it is a question of judgment where the rate is that maximises the revenue. Now, it is quite clear from the evidence of this year and the revenue and customs figures that 50% was too high a rate to maximise the revenues. It is quite clear that 45 gets you more revenue than than 50. I actually think 40 would get you more revenue than 45, and I'm very pleased to hear that there's a Liberal Democrat now, of all people, writing a book on this subject today. And I welcome that very much, and I look forward to more progress in coalition talks about the maximising rate of income tax. Whereas if you took it down to 20, you would clearly lose a lot of money. Somewhere between where we are and there is the maximising rate, and it's partly science and partly trial and error to try and get it. But you can be sure that we are now moving in the right direction, having gone in the wrong direction. And it's very interesting how the former Prime Minister, former Chancellor of the Exchequer, all the time he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, never took the top rate above 40%. Now, I don't think that was because he liked rich people or wanted to be unkind to the left wing of the Labour Party. I think it was his judgment that anything over 40% would have cost him revenue, and I think he was right. And so I'm a very modest man. I'm accepting that there is something where the former Prime Minister was absolutely right, that he was correct in not raising the top rate of tax above 40%.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and he's making his case about corporation tax and also the 50p rate being reduced to 45p rate. Would he apply the same logic of Laffer from direct taxation to indirect taxation? Because it would be very interesting to hear his comments about the raising of VAT to 20%.
Well, it is quite clear from the figures that the raising of the VAT rate to 20% increased the revenue. So, yes, there would be a Laffer effect in VAT, but 20% is clearly below the optimising point if your only interest is in increasing the amount of revenue. We haven't yet got to the point in VAT, or we hadn't, going from 17.5 to 20, where it cost you revenue. Had it cost you revenue, I'd have been the first to tell the front bench that I thought it was a ridiculous idea, but I understand their need for more revenue because they inherited such a huge deficit.
Companies before they even make a profit, isn't it?
It was too quick for me, the honourable gentleman.
They buy companies before they've even made a profit.
Indeed, there are timing issues on VAT, as the honourable gentleman says, but I don't really see how that affects the argument about whether putting the rate up brings in more money or not. Again, it's in the figures. We're drifting a bit far even from this rather wide amendment, I fear, but the alternative options to help business, I suppose, could include VAT, but it is quite clear that if we cut the rate of VAT again, there would be a substantial loss of revenue. We have just cut the income tax rate, and there has been a colossal gain of revenue. I think we should learn from those points, and it would be very interesting. I don't know whether the front bench of the Labour Party was suggesting, but I think there was some suggestion that there would be no loss of revenue for local government from cutting and then freezing the business rate. I don't know whether the honourable lady wants to intervene. That was my understanding of what she says. So I think we have here a conversion of the Labour Party to the Laffer effect as well. And they are now asserting, I don't know on what evidence, that if we actually cut the business rate and then froze it, we would collect the same amount of revenue. I'd need persuading on that. I'm not sure the business rate is at that point yet. But if it was, it would be a very sensible proposal for the front bench of the coalition government to take up. And it would make it an even bigger pity that Labour didn't bother to table a proposal along those lines for us to be able to vote on today. That might have drawn me into the lobby, even against my own front bench, if the case had been well made and I felt that the Laffer effect was well established on lower business rates. And now I've shocked my front bench. Having earned myself a brownie point by my earlier remarks, I have now profoundly shocked my front bench, but as they are well aware, they are quite safe because there is no proposal for cutting the business rate on the order paper, and the Whip has just found that out apparently, so she needs to do a little bit more homework before coming to these debates. Now she's complaining that she didn't say what she said. And as she, in the record, would have said nothing, who am I to disagree, Mr. Anyway, before I get into any more trouble, I just wish to conclude my remarks by saying I will not be supporting this amendment because I don't think that kind of review will help. I don't understand how it will be judged, and it doesn't seem to have any direct impact on Labour policy. I am perplexed by the fact that Labour, for once, have a clear policy, but they're not tabling it so that we can debate it fully and vote on it. And I do strongly support lower corporation tax rates. I think they would be very helpful.